Here we go. Escape and there, I just improved the volume.
Yes, fantastic now.
I'm in the dark. How can I get some light here?
Is that Tim there?
Oh, okay.
Tim?
You'll notice I'm on my new computer, so you can see me better.
Yeah, your visage has improved greatly since the last time I saw you.
How much
My
you
hair
pay?
has gotten longer too.
Yes?
Yeah, well, I have to look at it.
I need a haircut.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, there we go.
Do you give haircuts? Do you give haircuts?
She does to me.
While we're waiting, David, I'd love to hear a little, how is it going teaching? I assume you guys are all online? Is that true?
See, I'm retired.
Oh, my goodness. Congratulations. I didn't realize that.
I've been retired since 2012, but I do Zoom every week with my colleagues at Howard, who's still on the faculty. And no, the classes haven't resumed, but it's all online now.
Yeah, so are the ones I occasionally teach.
How's the experience for you?
You can see the students better.
Sorry?
You can see the students' faces better.
That's a start.
How much you pay?
No, we got
What do you-
a good bunch here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question I wanted to ask concerning the vaccines, because from what I've been able to pick up just today on the radio, many French people are rejecting the vaccine. The fact that it's presented by the government and this new distrust of science that we've experienced in the United States. In any case, there's been a big problem in the rollout of the vaccine. Could you talk about that a little bit?
No.
Or-
I can't say.
Or you,
Dan,
Dan? Because I
maybe Dan.
haven't kept up with it.
Yes, it
Um,
is more.
It's expected. The opposition to vaccines is very strong. There are organized groups of anti-vaxxers trying to kill their memberships, kind of like the fascists, you know, in the Capitol the other day. And there will continue to be opposition. On the other hand, there are also mobs of people saying, me, I want it.
Yeah, I think
And,
that's
and
right.
by the way, I've had my first dose.
Yay.
Yeah, look at you.
It comes from being part of the medical school faculty.
There's two things. There are the anti-vaxxers and the right, but there's also people who just don't trust the government, and they're not necessarily the same thing.
There are
Although-
also anti-vaxxers on the left.
I agree on this point. They're not the same thing in totality. Or you have,
Depends on your country.
yeah, I'm talking about France and probably the UK as well. You have quite a small but quite a vocal percentage of anti-vaxxers, but you have a lot of people who just do not trust the government.
In the United States, there is a historical pattern, which is tragic, of Blacks and Latinos avoiding vaccines and other medications for this very reason. And then there are sections of the left who are into the, food fads and anti-vax kinds of things. And I argue with them frequently, although the ones I know are all wanting this vaccine. I will also point out it depends which vaccine. There will probably be different fears of different ones as people figure out that there are differences.
Yeah.
And that the current political push in some areas to give everyone their first shot, even if it means people delay for their second, is potentially a disaster.
Yeah, this is, I was talking to my dad the other day, and he's just over 60, and he was saying that what he's worried about is they've tested it, they've tested this vaccine and it was safe, and it worked if you did the second shot in 3 or 4 weeks. Now they're on about delaying this for 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 16 weeks in the UK, and he said this just doesn't make sense, and I have to agree with him.
Let me tell you something even more. The implication of having lots of people with single dose of vaccine means evolutionary pressure for the virus to avoid the vaccine. It's destroying the efficacy of the vaccine potentially. It's probabilistic, it's not certain, but it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I understand why it's being felt and what the pressures are, but it's a potential disaster.
What's the real danger is that if people get the first dose and not the second dose, the virus can mutate, and then you get new variants. And
probably. We don't know any of this.
Yeah,
but the risk is there. The logic is clear. You've got a partial immunity that's more partial rather than with 2 doses. And that means as viruses come to you from your neighbors, those which are more likely to actually infect you so you can spread them are those which can get through that partial immunity.
Yeah.
The logic.
I was watching Chris Hayes show the other night, and he was talking about the push to get $2,000 checks into everyone's hands. He said, why not just offer everybody, if you get vaccinated, we will send you $2,000. Combine the two and provide some more incentive.
Well,
it's not as crazy as it sounds.
It's too logical.
Doing 1,000 a dose.
Yeah, 1,000 a dose, even better.
What's crazy is the lack of availability of the vaccine throughout much of the United States.
That's true too.
Part of that is the manufacturing time, and part of that is the total incompetence of capitalism at the moment.
Well, the capitalists are basically trained. What we have is neoliberal governance, and neoliberal governance is trained to make the rich richer in order to, what they do is their primary value is investor freedom. Okay, and the freedom to invest is what they're really interested in, and that's what they send up the flagpole and salute. And society survives is another, whatever.
Yeah.
We could all die and they don't care.
In that paper I wrote and sent around about the current crisis, one of the things that is underlying that is the need to look beyond the general principles of the system to the specificities. And that when you come to this particular set of vaccine and production, you have to look at it specifically and not just in terms of neoliberalism with its well-known bad habits and characteristics. Because within neoliberalism, there are other forces operating. In this case, things like various government subsidies to the corporations, various fears of what happens if corporations get caught profiteering and the backlash they're going to face. And beyond that, the sheer push of their own staff.
Well, I'm sure Joe Biden will cover for them if they get caught, just like Obama covered for the banks, you know.
It's not that easy.
Well, there's a few facts that we know. One is that even with the best vaccines, certain people will have problems, serious problems. And we know that what will happen in the long run from these vaccines is totally unknown. But on the other hand, we do have a choice. One is the vaccine and one is COVID. See? So people are saying, well, I'm going to take my chances with the vaccine. And this is why, you know, a lot of people are going for it, because between the vaccine and COVID, they see a better chance with the vaccine. So the last point is the madness of how capitalism is organized, that you have this profit system. And let's just think about what it would mean to do it rationally. You would have one vaccine that the experts would find is the best. And this would be distributed to everyone in mass as quickly as possible. All right, I'm not a scientist, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
But the point is,
you're wrong on.
but the point is, the way a rational government would do it, I think we're agreed, is completely different from what's happened.
Oh, yeah. But that's a different argument. You don't necessarily want one vaccine because we don't know, and there's no way to know which is the best. And just as with antiretrovirals for HIV, it may ultimately mean everyone should get 2 or 3 different vaccines because they're attacking different parts of the viral process. By the way, I'm not a virologist, but I've got a certain lay knowledge of it from having been involved in epidemiology and related fields for the last 37 years.
Well, I just wrote to my doctor to say, when is my chance? I may be included. I read in New York State, you know, we're moving, I think next week, to group 1B, and certain people in that group include people with underlying conditions. And I was not in the first bullet pointed list for sure, but then there was another list that was like, these people may also be at higher risk. So I don't know if that means I'm included in 1B or I have to wait. Ooh, someone's getting their shot on Monday. Caroline. Yay.
Hi, Caroline.
Sorry, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I'm muted?
Go ahead.
No, you're
Okay.
good.
Yeah, no, I'm in 1B. It was already on like Saturday among teachers. There were links going around where you could sign up as long as you sign up on Monday for time starting Monday. Yeah, I'm 4:15 tomorrow. I should be getting my vaccination.
Well, good luck on the side effects.
I'm not worried about it.
No, I've had the shot, and people get more or less, 2 or 3 days. It can be a little bit of a bother. I had a sore arm. and a little bit of sore throat, and no big deal.
Yeah, I mean, you can get that even with the flu shot, right? So.
Yeah, it can be a little worse than that, but
No. I'm prepared. I'm ready.
yeah, you take your shot. As Stephen was saying, the alternatives are such that you take your shot. May I make an agenda suggestion?
Yeah, we kind of got started without starting, so sure.
Why don't we talk about
Typical of us.
politics rather than vaccines for a while?
Yeah. Yeah, do we all know each other here? I think So the future historians all know each other. Richard, Fred, David Schwartzman from DC, Sam Friedman in New Jersey is a prominent epidemiologist and AIDS fighter. Steve Halpern, who's a alternate history novelist who we met a few months ago. Jenny Greenman, who I'll let introduce herself. Sam Fassbender is working on a major work on utopianism and climate change and various other related topics. Mary, could you just quickly introduce yourself? I think you haven't been with the Future Historians up till now.
Yeah, Fred, the current title will be Utopian Dreams Against the Grain.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Mary, you need to
title
unmute.
at present.
I'm in favor of wheat.
We're
My name
waiting
is
on
Richard
Mary.
Greenman, and I've been part of this group.
Did it unmute it?
Yeah, Richard was going to go ahead and then we'll.
Yeah, you go ahead, Richard.
Am I muted or on?
You're on.
In any case, I'm still Richard. I'm a translator and writer and teacher of French, and I've worked in the Marxist Education Project, mainly giving courses on a writer named Victor Serge, who's a revolutionary and whose books I've translated and whose biography I've tried to complete.
So Mary?
Yes. Yeah, thanks for that work on Victor Serge, really important. I've been working with the Marxist Education Project in one form or another since 1975 when the first school opened. I'm now presently teaching the Volume 1 class for of Capital with the students in the MEP program. I've been involved in all kinds of movement activities over the years. I'm not going to go into that. And I've worked in all kinds of areas too, been working most of my life. I'm retired now. And I was curious to hear what people were thinking about the COVID and the vaccine and all of that today.
Caroline, you want to introduce yourself? Looks like she's gone offline. Oh, hello?
No. I'm here.
Good.
Yeah. Hold on. Caroline, I've been organizing with the MEP, I don't know, since 2013, I think. Currently, after other career trajectories, I'm an artist, but I'm also a public school teacher, and I'm on the steering committee of the Movement of Rank and File Educators. I've done other organizing in the past, but I'm here really kind of just to listen in as I lesson plan. So I am going to keep my video off, and I might jump off at some point as well. But I'm happy to be here and excited to listen to the conversation.
Caroline, what school do you work in?
I'm at Claremont International High School up in Bronx. I live in Brooklyn, but
You said Timon International?
sorry, Claremont International High School.
I'm sorry, okay.
Jenny, you work in the schools also, right?
Yeah, I work for a not-profit youth development agency. So we partner with public schools, providing mental health services and after-school programs and community school partnerships, things like that. But I'm always
What's the
curious.
organization?
I work for Pathways to Leadership and also our sister organization, the Leadership Program.
Yeah, I have
Oh, you've heard about school?
yeah, no, we don't work with you guys, but I've definitely heard of it. Yeah.
Are you on a standalone or are you on a campus, co-located campus?
Yeah, we're on a campus.
What's your
With
campus?
8 other buildings stuffed into it. And I'm in the old Taft campus, the one that is
Oh, Taft.
has been
Yeah.
notorious at one point for being really violent, where they pushed the teacher out of a window.
Yeah.
It's not like that anymore, but
Yeah, we've had programs at Taft for like 15 years. I don't know if we have anything currently, but yeah, definitely. Okay,
Jeff,
sorry,
maybe
everybody.
Caroline could chat in the chat and we could move on. Meredith, you want to do a quick introduction and then we'll get started actually talking about stuff.
All right, okay, create a context.
Richard, I just wanted to give Meredith a
Oh,
chance.
okay.
So,
I'm ready.
I'm Meredith. Been coming to MEP for about a year. I'm a technologist. I'm wearing all my corporate swag today. And I'm going to be taking my son to play soccer shortly, so I'm going to have audio on. I've been involved in like some activism in the past and sort of working on different currencies. Although after being part of MEP, I now understand the problem with all money is just that it exists. But crazy, happy to be here with all you all today.
Marx has a lovely section in the Paris manuscripts called The Power of Money.
Richard, did you want to get us started?
Oh, only just to create a kind of context. This group started 3 or 4 years ago, and the name that we chose was Future Historians. And basically it was made up of activists and people who study social movements who were asking themselves the question, is it possible for humanity, civilization, whatever you want to call it, to last, to survive into the 22nd century? And so we chose the method of retrospection, which is quite Marxist. We pretend that we are historians living and practicing in the year, it would be now 2120, correct? 121, 100 years from now. And our task is to write how we got there. How come we didn't succumb to atomic war or destruction of the environment or social conflict of total destructivity?
Neoliberalism.
We were looking for ways to imagine based on fact, not on fantasy, how from here we got to there and what there looked like. That is to say, a rather Spartan society of people who had united to face all of these threats, but who were still carrying on, and how the threats were overcome. And we carried on for several years. We wrote stuff which we put in a Dropbox so that we have a narrative that people can go to that talks about now, all the horrible things that are happening and the nearly inevitable conclusions of destruction. And then now, that's today, 2122, what it's like, and in between, and this is the hardest part, what were the struggles? What were the conflicts? And how humanity somehow, in whatever form, survives. And we worked at it. And you can go, would you put on the website so that people can copy it if they have forgotten it? I had trouble finding it. But it's a long text of a kind of a history book written in the form of a grid of then, now, and how we got to now. But it began to slow down. And I think the reason is that many of us got pessimistic. And now special meeting has been called out of context because the 6th of January has gotten us all a bit shook up. And so we decided to come together. I'll just be very brief. This isn't the first time that something like this has happened. The United States has been based on horrible Ku Klux Klan, white supremacist armed attacks on every institution of democracy that allowed Blacks to participate. And this goes way, 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 way back. It's built into the Constitution, but it certainly was the reaction to the victory of the North in the Civil War, to Reconstruction. So what we saw a few days ago reminded me, and I'm not the only one who has a little smattering of American history, of the riot in in Birmingham? No, not Birmingham. What is the name of the town? That where some Blacks were elected and they had a mixed government and they just came in and burned everything down.
Tulsa, Oklahoma?
Tulsa happened in 1920. This happened in 1888.
North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina.
Wilmington, that's what I couldn't get right. North Carolina. There have
Also
been
before that in New Orleans, twice.
right. Well, the whole history of Reconstruction is based on these kinds of white, racist, armed, anti-democratic insurrections. So the question is, on one hand, it's nothing new. On the other hand, what do we have to look forward to?
Can I have a couple of minutes to respond to my comrade?
Yeah, David, go ahead, and I'll put myself in the
Brief.
spot.
I'll be very brief. I just want to share the headline in the New York Times Sunday Review. Can you see it?
Black Power is
Black
here.
Power is here. And there's a young Black woman holding a sign, knocking our ass off. I like that, knocking our ass off. So I was stimulated by Richard's email, which included a piece by Peter Uris, right, which I found to be unduly pessimistic. And the message was that, okay, now Biden will use the Biden administration, and they will be bipartisan, will use these events to crack down on the left, BLM and everyone else on the left. And I found that to be rather unduly pessimistic in light of the fact that even Biden said that the treatment of the fascists on January 6th was markedly different than the treatment of BLM protesters. I mean, he noted the sharp disparity of treatment, and of course that doesn't guarantee anything. But I think that we have we on the left have a great opportunity, and it has to come through organizing from the bottom up to push the agenda of this new administration, starting with the beginnings of a Green New Deal, and again recognizing that unless this administration delivers some material benefits very soon to the masses of working class, including many Trump voters, will be headed for a worse situation in the future rather than the better. So on that note, that was my brief critique of what Richard put out.
You'll note you'll note, I'm just going to intervene here, that when Barack Obama took charge during the downturn of 08, 09, unless he improved things, that they were basically going to get worse with Republican victories. Well, that's precisely what happened. Congress flipped to the Republicans in 2010, and he used this sort of Republican shift as an opportunity to promote policies such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Grand Bargain, which was going to be $4.1 trillion worth of budget cuts, the military exempted, scheduled over 10 years. And, it could just very well happen that way. After all, Biden was Obama's VP.
Okay, so let's just try to, if you want to talk, put your name in the stack or put stack in the chat. And we have a stack now of myself, Jenny, Sam Friedman, and Stephen Halpern. So let's, continue the conversation. I had a few thoughts that I just wanted to bring up. I think a lot of us on the left have a pretty good understanding of how the right way to fight fascism. And therefore we think that and advocate and educate about the need for independent workers, militias, Black Defense Guards, meeting power with power in the street and not relying on the state. But those alternatives are not immediately available, and yet we have this burgeoning movement of armed rightists, active in the streets today. So we're at some risk of falling into the trap of calling on the state to reassert its own monopoly of armed force and ramp up repression, and call for the target of that to be the armed rightists, even when we know that the bodies of armed personnel themselves are honeycombed with fascists, and that any new repressive capacity would soon be turned against the left and popular movements. And I'd say that, the challenge is even greater in that even the fascists of the 30s mostly used clubs in their fists and feet and lacked the ready access to long guns and AR-15s that the US fascists currently enjoy. And then just shifting gears a little bit and looking back to the last great political crisis that US rulers confronted amongst themselves, the 1850s, the run up to the Civil War, involved any number of state and local level confrontations between constituted authorities and armed challengers. The cases of certainly in Kansas after the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, the actions and reactions among John Brown and his allies, the wide awakes that massed in the streets to support Lincoln's election. And then I think the link that David sent around to the New York Times article on the February 13th, 1861, when they were actually, it was the same situation. They were going to count the electoral votes in Congress. And the onslaught of a pro-slavery mobs in Washington, D.C., the threat of the governor of Virginia to send his militia into the city to prevent Lincoln's election. And the fact that at that time, General Winfield Scott just called out the army and surrounded the Capitol with troops and prevented anything of that sort. And then right straight into the beginning of the Civil War itself, when the German workers' militias in St. Louis overthrew the government of Missouri and kept Missouri from seceding from the Union. So I don't have any conclusions to this, but those are some of the things that I wanted to put on the table. Okay, Jenny is next.
So, Trump is clearly a liar, but he has been speaking emotional truth. That's something that had occurred to me in the last couple of years, and that's very important. And I think one of the most important things that was said on Wednesday is at the end of his so-called go home speech, he said, "We love you, you're very special." And that is very important, that's what every one of us needs, right? And that's what he gave these people, which is why they love him. And it's in a religious sense, right? This is faith. Faith does not need proof. That's the magic of faith. And I think no one's talking about that, and that I've seen, and I don't read as widely as you all do, but I think it's incredibly important because that need has to be filled somehow, right? This is like the lost causism or the aggrieved people or the ones who are like, I don't have white privilege because I'm poor. Like all of those things, like at heart, right? In the stomach and the heart, they needed someone to say, we love you, you're very special. And that we need to fulfill that need. And I think that whatever various movements come together, and I think they're going to be varied and they're going to look different and be loose coalitions, that we have to commit to restorative justice. And we have to think about some sort of, accountability and reconciliation movement, because without taking care of that, generations of people feeling traumatized and unimportant, that needs to be recognized and dealt with in some way, if there's ever really a chance to kind of get to the other side, loosen the grip of white supremacy. And that's all I want.
Sam Friedman.
Thank you.
And by the way, Sam circulated the text, in which I think I sent on to Mary and Caroline. I'll also send it to Meredith soon.
Yeah, and it's very preliminary text. I want to start by talking to Jenny's point. This is one of the reasons I've been writing poetry for the last umpteen years, is it does try to speak to the emotional, and why in the Future Historians group, often my contributions were poems. The current situation is, and I'm going to be like Fred, ending in a motto, I think. I think it's marked by contradictions. I think we need to understand several things that struck me about recent events. First of all, for all the posturing on the left, we were invisible on January 6th. People had said they were going to organize immediate general strikes in their cities and various other activities. And as far as I've been able to tell, none of that happened. I'm not sure that was a bad thing necessarily, but it's certainly something that I worry about. The second is that there has been umpteen years of rancorous conflict between the two parties. And yet we on the left understand that they're just the left, they're just the right wing, both of them. And yet, and Fred's little email he sent to us headed the January 6th of Donald Trump, which was obviously a play on the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, made me start thinking, hey, Fred, whether he knew it or not, had nailed something, which is Marx and confronting a different but similar kind of situation. Had gone and said, what's going on with the classes that leads it to look rational, to have a dictatorial kind of autonomized state? And he concluded it was because the classes were at loggerheads and couldn't resolve anything. I find that harder to believe because our class is totally disorganized. But on the other hand, what we have is something parallel to that, which is that capital faces a crisis and doesn't know how to get out of it. The U.S. Capitol in specific faces a crisis, and the U.S. state. They've been putzing around. One of the consequences is, in terms of Gramsci's concept, I think it was Gramsci, of morbid symptoms, is the whole right-wing movement. But the other thing to be noticed is there is, I think, some change happening in the capitalist class on two levels. First of all, National Association of Manufacturers, unlike the left, actually did something on January 6th. They said, fuck you, Trump. Out. Which is interesting because it shows one arm of the capital, which Trump had been appealing to with all his trade war stuff, bring industry back to the U.S., basically wasn't going to risk the legitimacy of the U.S. state, which is so useful to it, in behalf of that kind of crap. The other big change that's going on, well, two others. The whole thing of this last year, which has shown the incompetence of the tech industry. They're being outcompeted by the Chinese. They can't prevent security breaches of all sorts of kinds. The aircraft industry is falling from the skies. And the big change has to do with the environment, where there is finally a certain degree of waking up. They may have lost the planet around it, but over their slowness, but in the meanwhile, there are definite attempts to wake up. And this has implications about the anti-intellectualism that if you're going to try to respond to things like the climate crisis and the technological and the stuff of airplanes falling from the skies, you at the very least have to do a pro-STEM, pro-biology kind of anti-intellectualism. You can still knock the novels and all the rest of it, but you need at least scientific literacy. And, the whole Trump movement, and one wing of it, only one wing, but one wing of it has been anti-intellectualist. And that was true of the Bushes, that was true to some extent of Reagan, and others, including some Democrats. So as I say, I'm going to end up with a muddle. This strikes me as the characterization of the moment. It does mean that, and I think this is partly what David may be picking up on, that people like Krugman may have their moment in the sun because, they're rational pro-capitalists, which doesn't, by the way, mean they're not going to come down like a hammer on our part of the left. I will point out to you that rational capitalism was in many ways in control during the 1950s. And they, in the late 40s, and they were coming down on us as hard as they could, within limits. But beyond that, that's what I have to say, at least for now. Thank you all for listening.
Stephen.
Yeah, on Jenny's point, Che, he argued that what motivated him was a profound feeling of love. And I think it's useful to think about why he said that. Now, people mention this article here. Black Power is here, according to the New York Times. I was looking to see, I thought they might announce that Mumia Abu-Jamal had been released from prison. if Black Power was here, along with about a few 100,000 other people who are in prison. But no, they have a different idea. One was that Black people should leave. You read the section, there's an article that says that in the cities of the Northeast, Black people should just leave and go back down south where they could have more political power. So this is not worth talking about. This is on the level of absurdity. Now, to talk rationally, I'd like to recommend a film on YouTube. It's called The Case of the Legless Veteran. You can see this on YouTube. It's about Jimmy Kutcher, who was who lost both his legs in the Second World War, and the government fired him from his $39 a week Veterans Administration job because he was a member of the Socialist Workers' Party. Well, after a multi-year campaign, Jimmy got his job back and along with his back pay. Well, today, and in the film, there's a quotation by Farrell Dobbs, who was a leader of the Socialist Workers' Party, who said that they needed to put politics aside, that this was wrong. And we need to unite them around the fact that it's wrong and to bring in as many people as you can. And today, what's happening is the federal government is arresting people who participated in these anti-racist demonstrations. This happened in Philadelphia. It happened in outside of Denver, Colorado, in Aurora. People are going to these demonstrations. In Denver, you have the same kind of lunacy going on where they're talking about unarmed demonstrators are kidnapping heavily armed police officers. This is the charge that these people are being charged with that could potentially put them in jail for decades. See, and people can find out more about this case on the webpage of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So we can talk about the theory of the fact that now the government is going to be more repressive because of the attack on Washington, whatever. But this is something concrete that we can do. There's this defend these people who are being framed up for marching in these demonstrations. See, and this is something the government has done in the past. They're doing it now. In the past, there were these committees that were able to reverse these frame ups. Some of them were successful, some of them weren't. But this is something that we have to do in order to create a movement, to advance a movement that can advance our interests. That's what I have to say.
Anyone else want to get on Stack? Stack, David Schwartzman wants to speak again, which is great. Does anyone who hasn't spoken like to say something first?
I would like to say something to Fred when the time comes, but go ahead with the other person first.
Well, go ahead, because David's already spoken. So go ahead, Mary, and then we'll go back to David.
Well, what I'm hearing is a lot of good thinking and problematizing about our situation now. And I just wanted to go back to something that Richard had said, and he was talking, I thought it was really wonderful, the question of the historical process, and that when you're in the current, the unfolding that historical process leads to what the current is, and that is Marx's method. In fact, we just did the process of exchange in volume 1 class, and you can't begin to understand the development of money without knowing that historical process, that what it really is underneath it, what it really is, because all you see is the appearance. A lot of what we're talking about is the appearances of the problems that we're up against subjectively and everything else. Gramsci said when the two classes are not able either to seize power, that's a moment for fascism. We are at this point where capitalism is global. It's completely global. The working class is global. There's not one thing any of us consume that isn't produced globally and distributed globally. But they're pushing, almost all of the places, nationalism at home. Every individual worker in the United States, no matter what gender orientation, color, history is dependent on everybody else, but we don't know it. So we're up against the fetishism of commodities. We're up against a global process. Even viruses now are global. Why? Because of the nature of capital, not because viruses just do that. Richard Levins, one of the great epidemiologists, I learned a lot from him because he was a great participant in the Marxist programs that we had, and I got to know him very well. And he told me viruses are a product of what we've done in making ourselves in the world. They weren't, they evolved out of our practices with nature, and they're not necessary in the existence. They're the one thing that could be that is not necessary to the ecological process, the only thing. And the fact that it's global now is because of our process. So if we're not, we have to do exactly what everybody's saying, but if we're not problematizing it within the context of the class question and overcoming it, I mean, we can go out and try to have unity around the racism and all of these issues in prison and so on. But if we're not doing the work of the class, identifying the class and break, I live in a working class, I'm from the working, come out of the working class, and I'm living in a working class community in Throgs Neck, and many are Trump supporters because they are doing what Jenny's saying. He speaks to that thing in them, and they're pushing the nationalism. They believe in the economy. The economy has to work. The fetishism of commodities. They believe that if they won't have a job if they're not making money, make more money. That's natural. This is the nature of the economy. So we have to protect ourselves from all these other peoples and so on. But in terms of their own reality, that's not true. It's not factually true, but it's emotionally true in all of this. So if we're going to overcome all these kinds of things that we're trying to raise, we have to do the work like what Richard's saying historically. We have to understand all of these aspects are the result of this historical process. There's no longer any tie of money to the real wealth that's produced. It's not based on the gold standard. They got rid of that after World War II, after that's when the real globalization takes place on highly developed capitalist production with working class that is highly productive, and they don't need us. The viruses are very, very healthy for capital. It wipes out working class, it wipes out the conditions of production. And because they're not basing making money is based on derivatives, futures, not on real wealth that's produced now, on rents. It's on rents, it's on extraction. This is a historical developmental process. And we're feeling it, all of it, but the working classes of the world are divided. They're not. I mean, Trump's mouthing nationalism, but he's completely globally connected in his investments, as they all are. But we're thinking nationalistically. And we in the left have to think within the context of our concrete national context, but we have to be international. And we have to work to develop within the working class the capacity to see themselves as the subjects that are internationally connected. And this is where we're really not strong anywhere in the world. And this is an endgame period that we're in. So everything everyone is saying is right on target, but we got a problem. I think we have to, as a left, start to problematize it within this historical moment that we're in, which is a global moment, which is affecting all of us, and we are divided. And they're going to succeed. When you have this place where neither class can assert itself fully, you're going to, it's going to be going more to the right and more to destitution of working people and more conflicts between them in an everyday way. Crime in the Bronx is not crime against white and black. It's people preying on themselves, on their children, on the streets. Children are dying. We're preying on each other, and it's a really we have to confront that as we talk about the question of Black power and all that too. But none of these communities are unified, and they're not. They got rid of Martin Luther King at the moment when we were beginning to have a unified movement. He's assassinated soon after the large march on Washington, when he's in front with the white and black and everybody working class right on the front. He's against the war. He's become a democratic socialist. He's making real unity in the class. We have no process like that right now. That was destroyed. They destroyed it, and they put heroin on the streets to destroy it. And now we have heroin rampant throughout all of our societies, and they're making a lot of money from it, and it's keeping the stock market up. So we got to get very concrete from the standpoint of the historical unfolding in the way that Richard outlined. I think that was beautiful what you said, Richard. This is the task this is the task scientifically. And some of the left has to start communicating with others around the world in that way. And we have to start problematizing how we can do that in an effective way. Because everything we are all saying is so real. It's so right on, but that's not going to solve unless we problematize it and become pragmatic in terms of programmatically thinking it through what needs to be done and then figuring out how to organize that work to do it. The main thing right now is consciousness, class consciousness within the working class, so that we can be a unified class that can really contend this and prevent fascism and become, because none of our problems can be solved now because of the global character of capital. None of them can be solved nationally, none. Not the virus or anything. These are international problems. If we're really going to solve them, they're going to have to be done by the class as a whole through communications in the context of the specifics of their national realities. You know, they're going to be different national realities, but it's going to have to start being problematized that way if we're going to have a future. I mean, we can stay talking around like this, but if we're going to have a future in the way that Richard's posing it, these are the challenges. And right now, it's the signs of that are they're around, they're there, but they haven't consolidated into anything yet. And we're not defeating nationalism internally in most of our nations. But it's great. This is a great discussion. It's so important. Many more of these kinds of discussions have to go on, and I'm not criticizing anything anybody said, because everything is a part of the piece of the problem, and they're right on. And if it's not without love, forget it. If it's not without compassion, if it's not without connecting, there isn't going to be any movement. So the humanization has to be going on constantly between us all, within our communities and across communities. And we got to figure out how to do that in a real way. So this is great discussion. I'm sorry it took so long. You just brought up so much. Everybody brought up different aspects of a totality that's so vital and so important that I can't help it. I'm sorry.
We're accustomed to that sort of long disquisition here. So
Okay, well.
No problem. Unless someone else who hasn't spoken wants to go, David Schwartzman's next up. Go ahead, David.
Okay, well, that was a lot of food for thought. I just want to address a few things that people said. And Mary, I think you're right on that this movement has to be transnational. Absolutely. And starting with the unfolding of a Green New Deal, which has to be a global Green New Deal. Absolutely. And that was actually, why I supported Howie Hawkins in this election, in strategic voting, and I'm delighted of the outcome of the presidential election, let me say that. But we have now an opportunity to build on particularly Bernie's Green New Deal, which did include a bit of demilitarization and addressing some of the foreign policy impacts of our imperialistic regime. And so that is a real challenge that we face. Now, in terms of the Black Lives Matter, I'm thinking of Barbara Ransby's point last spring that this is class struggle of the 21st century. Now, of course, it's not unfolded, it's not developed into a more powerful mode, which we all want to see happen. But nevertheless, we should recognize that as a foundation, I think, of how we need to defeat the fascists and move the neoliberals, defeat the agenda of the neoliberals at the same time. And then one final point in terms of which Stephen brought up. There's certainly divisions among even the Trump voters. I saw a poll of the Trump voters regarding January 6th, and they're very deeply divided. Many of them were really repulsed by what happened and alienated from the elements that attacked the Capitol. So I think we need to recognize that. Secondly, I don't think Stephen mentioned what happened in Salem, Oregon, which I saw a video of the fascists and neo-fascists attacking the police, and the police pushed them back, and they were saying, "Fuck the blue." Okay, these were the fascists saying, "Fuck the blue." So there is, we know that the police around the country have been infiltrated by the Trump people. But at the same time, this attack has posed an opportunity to expose this infiltration and defeat it. Again, we should not be so pessimistic. If we are, well, should I quote what, who was it? They attribute to Gramsci, but realism of, what is it? Fred, you could say it. Yeah, I mean, it's, pessimism of intellect and optimism of will. Yes.
Mhm.
And, that's, we need to be more
Yeah.
optimistic in what can be accomplished and not be defeatist. Because if we're defeatist, we will be defeated for sure. And finally, I should point out, and I shared this on our Future Historian listserv, but I just checked, there are 85,000 members of DSA now. Over 85,000. Now, are they going to be organizing? I hope so. They're going to be organizing in collaboration with BLM and other elements on the left. And there's where a great opportunity we have to push the agenda. So please don't go home after this Zoom. Well, you're already home. I'm sorry. Don't shut it down without being, let's say, more optimistic of what we can accomplish and not be discouraged, because the openings, I think, are there that haven't been there unless Trump was defeated. That was a defeat for fossil capital. Let's recognize that. And it's not a final defeat by any means, but it is a defeat. So I won't speak again. Other people should pitch in.
Can I just underscore that last point he's making? Because this is the moment where we have to have the optimism of the will. And there are signs everywhere. It's just the challenge of problematizing it and coming up with organizing strategies and ways, and especially in this pandemic period, and how to build the international ties as we build the local ties. So I think this is really, it is, I mean, I'm very pessimistic of the, pessimistic of the mind, and but the optimism of the will. There's no other choice. And this is what we have as human beings, the ability to do. So we have to grab it. We have the ability to change and to change the world. And we have the tools in our natural species character to do it. And that's the great challenge. And that should be the great joy also, the great joy in moments of defeat and moments of victory. It's, we have to identify that in ourselves and then connect it with others. So I thank you for that. I think that's a very good point. And I think there's a lot of cynicism right now in us, and it's hard to overcome it. So we also have to take that into account. It's very hard right now to overcome it. And it impedes us in how we do our work. It is there, and we have to consciously deal with that as well.
Let's go to Sam Friedman and then Stephen Halpern.
Yeah,
Richard.
let me speak to this question of accentuate the positive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I partially agree with it, and I partially think it's bullshit. And one of the useful things, you know, when I comment that the left was invisible on January 6th, that's got its positive side as well as its negative side. A lot of illusions about progressive strength. We have to cut through all that. We have to understand where the strengths and the weaknesses are, which is why in the piece I'm trying to write around, you know, the balance of class forces within capital, I'm trying to be infinitely realistic and balance the national and the international reality of capital, because it's got both. You know, an element Mary didn't mention, but I'm sure agrees with. The other positive point that's being analyzed by some very sharp people roughly in our camp is the women's marches. I mean, I imagine people have probably seen this nice little pamphlet book, costs $15. Feminism for the 99%. You know, they make a true point. Women's marches have also been strikes, and many other actions have embodied many elements of women's power and organizing. Once again, you don't want to push it too far. You have to be realistic about it. And some of the stuff about social reproduction, feminism is being wildly different from the better forms of Marxist feminism in the, you know, in the last 30 years. I think it's mistaken. I don't think there's meat there. You know, and I've talked to some of the theorists of social reproduction feminism about that. I think, though, that when you talk about class struggle, you're talking about the ability to impede production and then to reproduce production on a working class socialist basis. And that requires certain kinds of organizing beyond BLM. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me on that, although BLM is certainly a part of it. As I've been looking at the class struggles over the last 20 years, you know, the fact that masses of people block highways and that that's an effective power instrument is a part of what's going on. It's happening in India right now. Yet, ultimately, part of what you've got to do, and this is part of what speaking to the heart means, is in the workplaces of various kinds, and some of them more strategic than others, but you know, we are where we are. You've got to find ways to speak to people's daily needs and to organize it towards the international movement. Now that is a hard road to hoe that we've been working on for at least the last 150 years with only partial success. I just want to mention two things I've been doing that or have done that bear on it. One is, and some people here don't know me, I wrote a book, somewhat outdated, on organizing in the Teamsters in the 1960s and 70s, called Teamster Rank and File. Some of that is still valid. Some of it wasn't that profound to begin with. But, you know, some of the literature from that time is still useful. The other thing I'm working on, and it turned out that some other people are working on some similar kind of thing, is I'm writing up a poetry booklet about the efforts to organize the working class by the tendency I was part of primarily, not entirely, during the 1970s and early 80s, where I'm capturing some of the gut-wrenching things people were expressing about why they had become socialists. You know, speaking straight to the heart, as well as teaching some useful history. So that, you know, we're a bunch, not all of us, but a bunch of us are old folks. And we're looking at how we can put our last little marks on the world before we die. And these kinds of things may be useful. So I'm just suggesting that. And thank you once again for listening.
I think we have Stephen Halpern and then Richard and then Sam Yolday Fassbender.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I wrote a novel looking back from 2101, where I imagined a socialist world where poverty, discrimination, war would no longer be a part of the human experience, and all enterprises would work in harmony with the environment. At least they would attempt to. So in order to imagine that, I also had to imagine that a struggle would erupt that was capable of putting in place that kind of government that would make human needs the central priority. And why did I think that that was possible? If we look at history, to me, there are two trends. Masses of people have adapted to horrendous political, economic regimes for long periods of time. But that's only one part. There's another part, which says at a certain point, masses of people organized to do away with those horrendous political, economic regimes. So saying that, we haven't seen a mass movement in this country by working people since the civil rights movement. So the fact is that the working class is, in one way or another, an active part of our environment that hasn't really shown itself. And you know, I was at a demonstration this summer where 100,000 people participated against police brutality. Now, this didn't happen because there were communists who went door to door and made very clever arguments. No, there was a mass sentiment that brought 100,000 people out into the street, you see. So my point that I'm trying to make is that there is going to be a mass movement that's going to challenge the government. I think when we look at history, this is just repeating. This is what we learned from. This is how history works. It hasn't, just because it hasn't happened for 50 years doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So the point is, what do we say? What do we say? So to these people who are thinking about what needs to do, we see the rage. We see the rage out there. This is not about what happened in the Capitol. This is about how capitalism is in the severe crisis and the economy is literally falling apart. And people are enraged by the lack of action or actions, lack of actions by the government to deal with this profound crisis. So we just need to be careful about activities that we are involved in, patiently explaining, that we can have a government that makes human needs the priority, that this is possible. And in order to do this, we have to march in these anti-racist demonstrations. We have to defend people who are being framed up. We have to reverse the legislation against abortion. We have to do many things, and to show how all of this is relevant. So that's all I have to say.
Is it my turn?
Yeah, Richard, go ahead.
Well, I certainly agree with you and all those that have said that the most important immediate action is to defend the nonviolent, Black Lives Matter, women, youth, all the people who over the summer went into the streets, surrounded police stations, surrounded governor's offices, and carried on semi-insurrectional, mostly nonviolent activities against the constant and historical injustice by the police and the authorities against Black people and Latin and other minorities, and against the poor in general. And this was a high point. So I didn't read that Times article that said, what was the title? Black Lives Matter is here, or something like that. We shouldn't forget that. On the other hand, everything is so, Black power is here. Okay, but white power is here also. And white power has the advantage, of having at least more than half of the government openly on its side, the Republicans in Congress and the governors and all of those. So this is a very, very sharp contrast, and the struggles, although they're sort of symbolic and mini struggles, are taking place over centers of power, whether they be police stations or the Capitol. Now, I think that a lot of these movements that are going on, that went on this year, are symbolic. A couple of people get killed, and that's bad, but we don't have a true insurrection, which has got to be mass and has got really to aim at power. This was one that was organized by power, but organized in a way of a charade, practically. So please don't. Now, what I keep going back to in my own thinking is the role of the armed forces, okay? The United States has a huge army, and most of that army is Black, Latinx, other people from oppressed minorities. And its historical role in an imperialist country, starting from Korea and going through Vietnam and everything else, is to impose United States hegemony on all of the different countries that are trying to go their own way and are rebelling against this. So It's a class army in a sense. It's a minority army. And it's not going to go out and start killing American minorities, American blacks in the streets. We saw that when Trump made his worst mistake, which was try to drag his head of the army and General, what's his name, Miller, to go over to that church and hold the Bible upside down in order to prove that, I don't know what, that he was loved and so on. That went down very, very badly with the top brass, because they knew that they had to say, and they said it immediately, not in a wishy-washy way like Biden, but that this is an army that does not interfere in American politics. And he reassured the hundreds of thousands of Black and other minority soldiers that they would not be ordered to go in and put down these mini insurrections. And that's something, it seems to me, is very significant. Now, if we pull the camera back and we look at the world, we see that, so many countries have evolved into a kind of crony capitalism, where you have authoritarian leaders, semi-dictators, depending on police and other forms of repression. And that even though they're rivals, they're also help each other. It's not completely crazy that Putin and Trump and the rest of them are pals and help each other out. So that what everybody that's been saying that it's international and that the resistance has to be international, I think sees something very, very important. Now, the last part is the wild card, but it isn't as wild as that. And that is, as has been mentioned by several of us, that capitalism is no longer viable, and that one form or another of worldwide economic collapse is on the agenda, and it could happen very, very soon. And that all the governments so far have thought of nothing else but to prop up the billionaires, whose billions have multiplied during this whole period in which the poor and the minorities have done nothing but suffer. Now, they've been bamboozled and they've been recruited into the camp of the class enemy through nationalism and racism. And certainly that's not going away tomorrow. But when the shit hits the fan and everybody has got to scramble to survive, and we'll see around the issue of debt, of student debt, of evictions, of unemployment, of unequal and missing health care, and a dozen other issues that will jump into your minds, that there will be something more like a comprehensible class struggle. And that's when what we're talking about will become more real. I don't know what it'll look like, but I was thrilled during the summer by the Black Lives Matter little uprisings, which actually in numbers, given that they were in all the provinces rather than DC, were more powerful and more numerous than this thing that happened in Washington on January 6th. And they didn't get the army to put it down. And the Trumpists tried to organize different fascist gangs, which ended up going to Washington on the 6th, but they didn't really succeed. And the whole issue of justice, one justice for the nonviolent who demanded justice, and another for the Confederates, for the KKK, who were more violent and more armed and so on. I don't know how this is going to play out. And I didn't say I agreed, I said I was afraid that the Democrats will do little or nothing to punish the violent, seditious, insurrectionist rebels, because no one punished the Confederates. They put them right back in office, right? So that's where the problem is at, as far as I'm concerned.
You muted.
Just a second. Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, Sam, go ahead. Sam Fassbender.
Okay. For me, the sorry, excuse me just a second. For me, the defining moment of last year was, no, it wasn't, well, it was the CARES Act. It was the passage of the CARES Act. This was the political class's response to the crisis. And part of that response involved granting corporations access to direct Federal Reserve loans. Okay, that this is another part of the handout, the great handout to the rich that was part of this package that was in the CARES Act, right? This is something that further cemented the basically the alliance or the love affair, if you will, between Congress and the super rich, and which continues to this day. And as far as I can tell, the neoliberals were in power all throughout Trump, and they're still in power now, and they're going to be in power when Biden gets into office. And there really wasn't any sort of changeover in regimes, and they've got everyone fooled between, well, oh my God, we need to vote for the neoliberal with a D next to his name, because if we don't, the neoliberal with the R next to his name will win. And this is a shell game that they play with everyone. Well, another one of those shell games, and this was in evidence with the CARES Act, was between monetary policy and fiscal policy. What we can expect is that the Biden administration is going to try to apply fiscal policy in order to promote austerity planning, because a lot of Biden's, BFFs in the cabinet now, I guess this fellow named Reed is really the main example at present, are very much, partisans of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation and all of those nice folks who, helped Obama draft the grand bargain when he was president. And this whole notion that budget cutting is good for us, well, maybe it's good for bondholders, I don't know. At any rate, so monetary policy is when the Fed adjusts the money supply, right? Basically has a lot to do with Fed actions. And fiscal policy is about taxing and spending, right? That austerity planning within fiscal policy is we tax less, we spend less, or we tax more and we spend less, which is what we can expect from Biden. To cut that deficit, because cutting the deficit is terribly important. At any rate, as part of the CARES Act, they decided to put some of this subsidy for the rich in the field of monetary policy, because it's Fed loans. It's not really loans, you remember, because they go back and they spend the money on treasury bills, and then they get free interest money off of the treasury bills, and they use the interest money to pay back the loans, and so it's all free money. So here's my proposal. Let's organize the impoverished classes to apply for a Fed loan and see what that does. Let's demand from the government monetary policy for the 99%. Since it's already working nicely and well for the 0.1%, let's get monetary policy for everyone. Okay? Okay, my proposal. Go ahead, I yield.
Sam Friedman, did you want to speak again? Or was there someone else that was on stack?
Sorry, Fred, it was me.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how to get on. I don't know how to get onto the Slack so that if I want to speak again,
Not
how do I do
Slack,
that?
just the chat. Just
Or
put your
I
name
can't
to
figure out the chat either.
well, then just hold up.
Maybe I just waved my hands.
I'm sorry. Could you reintroduce yourself? Because I don't think we met you.
Sorry, my name's Dan. I'm a friend of Richard, and I've been a leftist since I was 16. I'm now in my 40s.
Right.
I've not got any degrees. I've not. There's no reason I should be here at all, other than the fact that I'm with Richard. I think one of the problems that I'm looking. I mean, you're all very, very, very clearly bright people, but we need to start having something where you keep saying we. And as somebody who is one of the impoverished classes you're talking about and things like this, we need to start having this we. We need to start building this we, and it isn't by doing Zoom calls and things like this. How can we build this we? And I lived in the United States, I've lived in the United Kingdom, I live in France, and I just don't understand how we can keep doing this. There's a fascist attack on the Capitol in America. All right. We talked about vaccines earlier on. When do we start building this we that we were always talking about? What can we do to build this we that we were always talking about? That's all I want to say, because everything you've said has been great, but you want to talk about an international working class, we need to start building that solidly and surely, and surely that means demands on our fucking national governments and things like this. Surely. We have to say to the French government or the American government, we want Medicare for all, or we want more, we want... And this idea that everyone just seems floating around like it's some sort of, I don't know, idea that the working class will suddenly get its act together. Sorry, I've been a leftist for, fucking 30 years, and we've lost every fucking time. So what are we going to do now? That's it. Sorry. I mean,
Thanks.
Anyone's bubble, but it's just sort of.
You're absolutely on to something there. I mean, that is the big question, among others. Mary would like to respond. Go ahead. You're muted.
Mary, you're muted.
Mute. Okay. I think somebody though wanted to go else. Okay. Well, anyway, I don't know your name who just spoke, but that's exactly what I want to speak to. What you're saying. Yeah, because this is an incredible discussion. But I want to try to be very brief and just target one thing. People will respond to their oppression. Historically, that has been repeated from peasants that were exploited by their feudal lords and so on. We'll do that at some point, and clearly now there's movements going on like Black Lives Matters.
But I'm 45, and I joined a left-wing party at the age of 15, and we've lost
I know, wait a minute, I'm on target with you. And I agree, like what Stephen was talking about in terms of upsurges and so on. But let's not forget history. Everything has failed. Every revolution that succeeded was overturned by capital. And even the communards, when Marx said, you've got to get control of the banks, you'll be defeated if you don't get control of the banks. And they didn't understand it. So yes, they had a mass movement. They seized power and they collapsed overnight.
Yep.
Just because people will respond to their oppression and go on the streets and do something doesn't mean they're going to succeed at changing the world. And I don't know for you, this is where the pessimism in my mind right now, we've been so defeated that the notion hasn't emerged in any of the movements yet that is even thinking transitional programs about the nature of the system that they're in. They're responding against injustice. They're responding against police brutality. They're responding against the prison systems. They're doing these things, which are important. None of that.
What you said there was fantastic. Okay, so
yeah.
we've got a dozen very, very, very bright people here. Why not write an international transitional program?
Well, I think that's I think the task at hand in a certain way is to, and also our movements aren't aware that they assume the money economy. They don't not assume the money economy. Black Lives Matters doesn't not assume the money economy. They want equality and fairness in the money economy.
It's about money. I think it's about.
So this is the task. This is the challenge we have. This way of produce and in the context, let me finish it, and then we'll it would be very brief. There isn't the consciousness that we are all, the working class is the subject. The producing class is the subject of history, is the makers of history, are the ones that do everything. Workers don't know that. That isn't embodied in any of our movements yet. That understanding that we are the producer, so therefore we could change it. And we're connected with everybody else in the world. That understanding isn't there. Money, the capitalists connect us, not us. We don't know that. That's why the divisions in the class are so intense and antagonistic. They don't know that they're connected with each other, and they don't know that they're the subject, but because they're only an object in the world. They're not a subject in the world, they're an object. They want to sell themselves to get the money so they can get what they need. When that doesn't work and the economy isn't working and that collapses, then anything can go on. So we don't have any movement yet, self-conscious movement, historically conscious movement that understands the context in which their oppression is occurring and what needs to be done to change it. This is the problematic in history all the time. And if, that was Marx's task. He said, I got to work on this scientifically, Engels and the movement. And this was Amilcar Cabral's task and Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau. It's everybody's, to make conscious this process. It isn't enough for us anymore to say these movements are going to emerge and to go against it and so on and so on. We have to do the dialogue now with each other, make that concrete, and get this stuff in and start it to be the problematized with them. We're not going to go, I don't have the formula for it. How do we start to bring make transitional program real to people? I'm not going to solve it. Just because I can problematize it doesn't mean I have the solution to it. But we're going to have to together. This is what I think is very important now. This has to be a discussion, public amongst us. Now the MEP is trying in its own way to make some of this happen, but it's got to be more than that. It's got to be, and all these good things that everybody's saying. We've got to problematize and start to figure out these links. We have to become a subject, but the class has to become a subject, and that's the task. They have to be, yeah.
You say that, but
I'm not going to answer the answer. I can't answer the question. I just can problematize it.
Said we've got to do this and say I don't know how. How do we?
Because it's not something you write on paper and then solve. You first got to problematize it, identify it, and then consciously work at it together.
Okay, let's
and that
organize ourselves and not do so much crosstalk.
Okay, right.
Dan Friedman was next on stack, and then we can return to Danny.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So much has been said since I asked to be in the stacks, and I'll avoid speaking directly to it in its entirety. Mass movements do break out. We've seen this a lot of times during this century. They do not come about of late because of what the process Danny was talking about, by and large. They have not come about because somebody's put together saying, let's have a, free health care for all and that kind of stuff, much as I'm in favor of our pushing that. But we should recognize that what seems to have happened time after time is they come about either in reaction to egregious police violence or egregious of other actions of the government or collapse of the economy. And I'm thinking here very concretely. At the beginning of the century, we had a magnificent movement in Argentina. And, I've worked a lot with Argentinians, so I have some feel for it. And, they kicked out 5 presidents in 4 weeks, I believe, and actually then faced down the IMF to get some years of respite on having to repay their debts because of the amount of workers' power they had. Yet, they didn't know how to maintain themselves as a group, as a subject, and they didn't know how to disperse the power of capital and to start doing it. Partly because they were one small nation, which is, and some of them understood that. And by the way, I might add, this is one of the reasons the Future Historians organized, was to help providing some of this consciousness. Then we saw the Tahrir Square and the stuff in Tunis, which arose in reaction to essentially police crap plus austerity regimes. And they organized themselves fairly magnificently. They, really did. Are people having trouble hearing me? No. Okay. They did a good job in a lot of cities around Egypt. They didn't have a sense of the working class as a subject. They didn't have a sense of themselves as a working class revolution in most cases. One of their cool tactics, by the way, was to destroy police stations, which disorganized the repressive forces. And that was organized chiefly by the neighborhoods in which the police were present. There's a lot of good books out in that, and I've been reading it some during the last year. Some of them were better books on it to see how they failed, because that's ultimately one of the things we have to understand. I was also closely associated with a lot of activists in the Maidan movement in Ukraine, which, had international consciousness in many ways, but it was the international consciousness of the European Union and, German and French social democracy, such as it was, as what they saw as their utopia. And we saw where that led to. So the point being, yes, we have to be organizing on a day-to-day basis. We have to be creating the kinds of programs that Danny's talking about and the transitional ones or whatever as well. It's not enough. We need to start creating a mass consciousness that we've got to do it ourselves. And that how we do that is hard, because what is also clear is that we're organizing at the moment of rebellion. The classic answer for that, which is to organize a revolutionary party, no one knows how to do it, so they're good parties. There's a lot of crap in our traditions about how you do it. You know, most of the stuff coming out of the SWP is toxic. Some of the stuff that came out of the American, you know, the Workers' Party was crap, and some of it had some strengths. Some of the stuff coming out of, you know, the Marxist humanist camp has some strength, but it basically gives up on the question of the party, which I think is a problem. I think we need parties, and we have to recognize that the anarchists as well as the socialists at various times had something to contribute, but none of it's going to be in the same form. And so, you know, all I can do is try to produce some literature that some people will read and maybe act on the basis of, and I think that's true of most of us here. Danny, I think, is probably more connected to the places where he can operate realistically. Me, to a little bit of extent, through my current job and my current local groups. Maybe Richard through the yellow vests, if he's still involved and if it still exists. But, you know, it's on that level that we're operating.
Well, where do we go from here? Got a lot of issues and questions on the table and food for thought, and maybe we're ready to kind of step back and ponder it for a few weeks and reconvene at a certain moment. Richard, do you have any last words for us? Or further words? Or anyone else for that matter?
I do. I just want to say, I think this is such a productive discussion, of course, unanswered. And it's just something maybe the MEP could reflect on, and maybe others listen to this and see if we can start to do some programming that creates an environment where people can really challenge and think about the period and since we have the Zoom thing, it's international, we might even get some international discussion, you know, about the questions of international solidarity and specificities and all the kinds of things that have been coming up. I don't know, maybe it's too big, problematic, I don't know. But anyway, to keep a discussion that's useful, not just like, I think this is a great starting discussion, you know. Anyway, that's a thought.
No, go ahead. Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to put out that at the present time, as all of this other stuff is going on, there is, at least in preparation, going to be an attempt at a People's Party. Okay, this is intended as a party to compete with the Democratic and Republican parties on their own level. Okay, that's what they're trying to do. It's largely the brainchild of a fellow named Nick Branya, who was a Bernie staffer in 2016 and has received a lot of very high profile endorsements. Okay, I can go on and list them for you, but you probably want to go on with something else. Okay. This is happening, folks, and maybe it'll succeed, maybe it won't. I'm just going to leave it at that.
I just wanted to mention that the Marxist Education Project will be doing a series this spring of, I think, every 2 weeks, a conversation about some of the articles in a collection of some of the greatest hits, so to speak, of Socialist Register, which all address these questions of class consciousness, organization, program history, et cetera, et cetera. So that might be a venue where some of these questions can be pursued. Richard. Unmute. Richard, you need to unmute.
DSA, among other small parties.
Can you start over?
I said, on this question of program, we've got the Green New Deal. It may not be perfect and it may not be pro-capitalism, but it's a serious radical demand for improvement. And we've got the $15 an hour, and we've got all kinds of environmental demands. It isn't for lack of program and lack of demands, nor is it for lack of parties. Because as I said, DSA has shown a good deal of health and growth and strength. And each one of you is connected with some other organizations that I'm not familiar with, but going in the same direction. So I'm not sure that lack of goals, visible goals, is really the problem. One last thing. The Trump regime began with a magnificent mass spontaneous women's demonstration against his inauguration. What is this inauguration going to look like? What is there to cheer about? Because Joe Biden squeaked through, and we don't have Trump to worry about. Well, that's not even true. He's not even going away. I don't know. It's a low, low moment, but something will happen later.
Well, that's kind of, I think that's the theme of the morning. It's a low moment, but something will happen.
Let's hope.
We march on. Okay, thanks, everybody, and we will be in
Great
touch.
to see you all.
See you
Thank
all.
you.
Yeah, sorry for putting in. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks for your contribution.
Bye
Okay.
bye.
Bye-bye.